Hey, I'm not sure what time it is. It's 9:03, and we'll now call this meeting to order. Good morning, everyone. Welcome, board members and guests, to the Wednesday, October 18th, 2023 meeting of the Placer County Transportation Planning Agency, Placer County Airport Land Use Commission, Western Placer Consolidated Transportation Services Agency, and the Placer County Local Transportation Authority. During public comment, after I open an item for public comment, those joining us by Zoom webinar can signal they wish to speak by clicking the raise hand button located at the middle bottom of the Zoom webinar window. If you are joining over the phone, you can press *9. PCTPA staff will call out individuals one by one who have indicated they wish to speak. If you experience technical difficulties and are unable to provide public comment during this meeting, please email your comment to solvysabol@ssabol@pctpa.net. Thank you, everyone. And Paul, would you lead us in the flag salute?
Absolutely. All please stand. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay, let's, item B, roll call.
Broadway.
Here.
Cortez.
Here.
Dowden Calvillo.
Present.
Howdeshelt.
Here.
Joyner.
Here.
Jones.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Okay, so item C, agenda review.
Madam Chair, the agenda remains unchanged.
Okay, great. Item D, AB 2449.
Madam Chair, we have a quorum. No board action is necessary.
Okay, wonderful. Item E, approval of the minutes from September 27, 2023.
Dowden Calvillo moves approval.
I second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Okay, and a roll call.
Broadway.
Yes.
Cortez.
Aye.
Dowden Calvillo.
Aye.
Howdeshelt.
Aye.
Joyner.
Aye.
Jones.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Okay, now it's time for public comment. Persons may address the board on items not on this agenda. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes. Is there anyone out there that would like to come and say something in front of us? No? Anyone on Zoom? All right.
Mike Barnbaum, you're free to speak.
Good morning. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you. First of all, good morning. I wish I could have been there in person, but due to the operator shortage causing Route 10 to operate on emergency Saturday services only during its 6 days of operation each week, I'm only able to join you on Zoom until the hours are restored back to Monday through Friday service during the week. But that being said, I wanted to congratulate the Placer County Transportation Planning Agency and the Capital Corridor Joint Powers Authority, who were successful in getting federal dollars through a CRISI grant to help improve freight corridors around the United States, and in particular, the section of freight corridor between downtown Sacramento and downtown Roseville. The securement of this money, and I'm sure Vice Chair Howdeshelt of the Capital Corridor Joint Powers Authority can elaborate and go into more detail on this, will help the corridor service get to an additional 2 round trips to Roseville bringing the grand total to 3. The one, as you know, goes to Auburn right now. And eventually in the future, staff is currently in the preliminary planning stages to reach the ultimate goal of an additional 10 round trips to Roseville for expanded intercity passenger rail service between the San Francisco Bay Area and Placer County. So congratulations to one and all. I'll turn the gavel over to back to Chair Jones, and if Howdeshelt would like to address anything more on this, fine, and then I'll come back and speak under the public hearing item later in the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Mayor Howdeshelt, would you like to make any comments?
You know, Mike said it all. We had a wonderful celebration. Seems like a year ago, but it was just a couple of weeks ago. At the station, we had the deputy administrator for the Federal Railroad Administration. We had the CalSTA representative there. We had Congresswoman Matsui's representative there. We had Mayor Joyner. We had Chair Jones. I think you were there that day, right? I'm trying to go through the picture. Right?
Quite a few people.
Uh,
Yeah,
Had a
Mayor
very good turnout.
Dowden Cavill. Yeah, I think everyone was there, and it was a historic day. And it was, yeah, I mean, nothing happens overnight. So, you know, I'm looking forward to 2028 when that second and third train happen, and then, you know, and then we'll get going. But it was a historic and significant moment, so.
Well, we do owe you congratulations.
Yeah, thank you, Matt, for being there, and, you know, and we had Placer Business Alliance there to, you know, make some comments about the significance of the day. We had Union Pacific, Peggy, and I learned how to pronounce her name, Egg Boo Hi, right?
Egg Boo-ha, yeah.
She gave me that, right? So I will never mispronounce her name again, but Union Pacific was there, and they're a terrific partner in achieving this. So thank you, Mike, for bringing that up.
Congratulations, Mayor Howdeshelt.
Well, I just happened to be at
You're gonna
this.
do the platform thing.
I just happened to be at the platform when the train arrived, okay? There were a lot, I mean, really, there were a lot of, over, you know, so this started 2013, I think we put a pin in it, and there've been a lot of, you know, county boards of supervisors, a lot of city officials that have been really
Right.
champions of this, and truly
But
just
it-
happened to be there at.
Well, it is in your kingdom, and you are the mayor, so anyway, we'll move
Thank you,
on then.
Chair.
You're welcome. Moving on to item G, consent calendar. Oh, I'm sorry. Great, let's hear from somebody else.
Peter Eklund, you're free to speak.
Well, thank you very much. I just have a quick comment. One of the items on the agenda is the polling and outreach for the sales tax measure. I think it's important. It's an important issue, and unfortunately, there are no. And I'm sure there's going to be some slides, attached to that presentation. And unfortunately, they're not
Excuse me.
included in the agenda. And
Mr. Eklund?
I'm just requesting that.
Well, are you addressing an
slides
item
be
that's
made
on the
available.
agenda?
Excuse me.
Are you addressing an item that's on the agenda?
It's an info item, so I can't comment on it.
I'm sorry, what did he say?
No.
Info item.
I've been
We can take comment.
I'm told that something is an info item, I can't comment on.
No, you can comment on
It
info.
says info, so if I can comment on it there, I will.
Yes, that's true. Do you have any other comments about anything that's not on the agenda?
Well,
We'll let you
yeah,
back
I'll
on when
comment
we
things on the agenda,
reach.
But my comment is, the public doesn't have any knowledge of what's going to be in the presentation, and I'm just asking that it be included in on the website, the PCTPA website, because otherwise you have to go back through and just go back through the video. So at this point, I'm just asking that
Okay, we're
that
told
the
that
slides be made available to the public.
it will be on the website.
That's all I'm asking.
Okay.
That's all
Great.
I'm.
Matt, would you like to comment?
Thank you, Chair, just through the chair. And Peter, just quickly, your audio was subpar. It was hard to hear all of that. Mike and I will reach out to you and we'll coordinate on this. Just wanted to give you that follow-up. So we'll touch base with you, okay? Okay, thank you.
Okay, now we can
Okay,
move on.
that's it.
Item
Yes.
G, consent calendar. Placer County Transportation Planning Agency. These items are expected to be routine and non-controversial. They will be acted upon by the board with one action without discussion. Any board member, staff member, or interested citizen may request an item be removed from the consent calendar for discussion. Would anyone like to remove anything?
Nope.
Nope. Then I,
Dowden Calvio moves the consent agenda.
Rochelle seconds.
okay, motion a second. Please.
Broadway,
Yes.
Cortez,
Aye.
Dowden Calvillo,
Aye.
Howdeshelt,
Aye.
Joyner,
Aye.
Jones.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Okay, then moving on to item H is another consent calendar regarding WPCTSA fiscal year 2023-24 budget amendment number 1. Would anybody like to discuss that? Or do I hear a motion?
Yep, Rochelle moves.
Dowden Calvio, second.
Okay, motion a second.
Broadway,
Yes.
Burris, Cortez.
Aye.
Dowden Calvillo,
Aye.
Howdeshelt,
Aye.
Joyner,
Aye.
Jones.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Okay, great. Moving on to item I, 9 o'clock, well, this is not 9 o'clock, but public hearing, 2023 unmet transit needs assessment and public engagement efforts. Mike Costa will be presenting.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and good morning, members of the board. Mike Costa, Senior Transportation Planner at PCTPA. As the board may be familiar with this process, but for members of the public, PCTPA does serve as the Regional Transportation Planning Agency for Placer County. As the Regional Transportation Planning Agency, or RTPA for short, one of PCTPA's primary responsibilities is to administer what's called the Transportation Development Act, or TDA for short. The Transportation Development Act is a source generator for two major funding sources that our local jurisdictions use for different purposes here in Placer County. One of the first major sources of funding that the TDA administers is called the State Transportation Assistance, or State Transit Assistance Funds, STA funds, and those are generated from a statewide diesel fuel tax that comes back to our region based on a formula that's divided among population as well as operating revenues to then determine what amount we get for our region to distribute to transit operators. The second source of funding, which is a larger source of funding, is called local transportation funds, or LTF funds. Those funds are generated from a quarter-cent general sales tax that then comes back to our region based on population. So STA funds, as I mentioned, they can actually only be utilized for transit purposes. So transit purposes including capital or operation purposes by our three transit operators, Roseville Transit, Auburn Transit, and Placer County Transit. LTF, while it's intended primarily for transit operations and capital support, it actually can be used for other purposes by our local jurisdictions outside of just transit operations. So other purposes include streets and roads maintenance needs or repair needs. However, as an entity, before we can distribute LTF to local jurisdictions for other purposes such as streets and roads, we have to conduct what's called the unmet transit needs process on a yearly basis, which is why we're here today. We also have to determine during that process that there are no unmet transit needs that are reasonable to meet before we can distribute LTF funds to our local jurisdictions for other purposes. Because again, LTF is primarily intended for transit, but it can be used for other purposes after there is a determination no unmet transit needs that are reasonable to meet has been found. So what is unmet and what is reasonable to meet? Our board actually adopts the criteria for those two categories, unmet and reasonable to meet. The last definition that was adopted was in February of 2021. And based on that definition, unmet is essentially for services that do not exist today. So that it doesn't necessarily mean service operational improvements. It means for services that do not exist at a certain time period. And then also unmet can be for services that are required to comply with our Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA requirements, which is established federal criteria. Then the second criteria that we have to look at, the reasonable to meet category, is essentially, in summary, reasonable to meet is determining if an unmet transit need is feasible, if it's viable, and if it's supported by our local and regional planning efforts and by members of the public, and if it can be supported with our existing funding sources. So it can't just be for services that can't show that they are not going to be viable in the near future. So we have to look at that criteria. So just an example of what some previous unmet transit needs that were found reasonable to meet look like. In 2015, there was a determination for a reasonable to meet unmet transit need to establish a bus pass subsidy for our social service transit agencies, which still exists to this day, and it's administered by our Western Placer Consolidated Transportation Services Agency. It's actually included in the budget on an annual basis. And it's a partnership between the CTSA and local social service agencies to provide discounted subsidies for fare passes on transit services for our 3 operators. I'm not going to go through all of these, but the most recent example of an unmet transit need was looking at establishing a better cross-jurisdictional service for Americans with Disability Act riders between our Rockland and Lincoln dial-a-ride zones. To the general public right now, they would have to transfer on Placer County Transit's bus services. If they're riding the on-demand services, they'd have to get off one bus when they get to the border of Lincoln and Rockland to get onto another to do that cross-travel. That is still in existence of today for general public. However, for ADA passengers, which are Americans with Disability Act eligible passengers, they can take a 1-seat ride through that boundary to get from Rockland to Lincoln. So it makes it more convenient and easier for those passengers. So that's an example of how we've addressed unmet transit needs in the past. So typically, as I mentioned, this is an annual process, and it begins around the September-October timeframe. For this year, our unmet transit needs process began when our survey was launched on September 5th. That survey is available and will be available through October 31st on our website. And then we will, after receiving all comments related to unmet transit needs, we will evaluate those comments with the help of our Social Services Transportation Advisory Council, or SSTAC as we refer to it. And that consists of different stakeholders, our transit operators, our social service agency partners, and other members of the public, including some people here today, that help us evaluate the unmet transit needs comments based on that criteria that I showed you previously for unmet transit needs and reasonable to meet. Once we evaluate the comments, we then bring forward a report to our board. Typically, this happens in the early part of the next year, and in this case, we anticipate bringing a report with our findings, whether there are unmet transit needs that are reasonable to meet, to our board in February of next year, so in 2024. How can people get involved? Well, aside from participating in today's public hearing, we are encouraging and really promoting our survey that's available through that QR code that's actually on our PowerPoint right now. But if members of the public want to also take it, they can find it on our website at pctpa.net/unmet-transit-needs. And then they can also, of course, always email me during this time frame with my personal email address, mcosta@pctpa.net, or give me a call if they have potential unmet transit needs that they want us to consider during this assessment. It's important to note that pursuant to our Title VI program responsibilities, we have also provided this survey in Spanish and in Tagalog, which we are making available to anyone who requests it. I'd also like to note that in our outreach that we've done in all of our local jurisdictions recently, we have been promoting the Unmet Transit Needs Survey as part of our comprehensive operational analysis, which is looking at improving transit services in all of South Placer region. And that survey for unmet transit needs this year is combined with that survey. So they serve a dual purpose for our projects. And so we've actually attended events in all of our local jurisdictions, including unincorporated areas of Sheridan, and soon to attend an event in North Auburn to promote the unmet transit needs process alongside our regional transportation plan efforts. So we are going out into every local jurisdiction to request solicitation on this process and determine if there are any unmet transit needs. So with that, if there aren't any questions from the board, which I'm happy to answer, I would recommend opening the public hearing for our members of the public that are attending today to solicit public comments on unmet transit needs. We will ask the members of the public to be very specific about their needs, identifying the day and the location and the time frame for when they'd want these needs so that we can, again, consider this with our stakeholders. And it's important to note that even if something does not rise to the criteria of unmet transit needs or reasonable to meet, it's still important and valuable that we hear from the public about any ideas about transit needs so that we can look at always improving the operational efficiencies and performance of our services with our transit operators. So unmet transit needs, while they don't rise to our criteria, are still important to help us improve our services. With that, this concludes my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions and recommend opening the public
Board
hearing.
members.
I just have a really quick procedural question. I see that the surveys are in English and Tagalog. Why Tagalog over Spanish or Russian or Mandarin?
Sorry, so the surveys are available in Spanish as well. So it's English, Spanish, and Tagalog. And Tagalog actually is a trigger for our Title VI program requirements for the Safe Harbors Provision Act that we're required to follow.
I see. Okay, thank you for the explanation. Thank you.
Other questions?
Well, so we have a set of comments here. Is Mike Farnbaum's comments only on the unmet transportation needs? And then the other comment from Walter Lawyer, is that on unmet transportation needs?
So the comments from Mike, and I know Mike is on the line, and I believe he's going to state his comments specifically, but we have received the comments from Walter Lawyer that are before you as well, and we will look at those and determine, we can include them in this process and determine whether or not they're unmet transit and reasonable to meet.
And then, so you mentioned the criteria for determining if it's reasonable, feasible, I forget what the other criteria is. If there is a specific population, right? How do you weight a specific population's needs against the universe of population needs to determine the feasibility of things?
That's a really good question. I think we really look at, in terms of if it's a specific population's needs, we look at what resources are available to this date that we have, that if it can't be served by transit, is it services that we can provide through our partnering social service agencies? Because we do have CTSA programs that provide gap coverage services, like our Placer Rides programs provides reimbursement for volunteer drivers, or excuse me, for the passengers to then solicit their volunteer drivers. And then we also have a last resort ride for services that can't be provided by public transit.
So, thank you. That's very
Other questions? My question is, your outreach to communities, is it all the, are you going to include all the unincorporated areas of Placer County, like Granite Bay, Loomis? I should say unincorporated Loomis, not the town of Loomis.
So, yeah, we've tried to attend as many pop-up events as we possibly can, given our staff resources.
Okay.
We have not been physically out in Granite Bay, but the survey, of course, has been promoted through many channels that reach Granite Bay,
Yeah.
and even areas like Forest Hill and Tahoe and all of that. We have been out to Sheridan, and we will be out in North Auburn, and we've been out to every incorporated city as well for all of local events to promote not just this process, but our regional transportation plan.
Okay, well, I'd like to help reach out to my unincorporated areas, Granite Bay, unincorporated Loomis, Penryn Horseshoe Bar. Okay, I guess we'll open this up for public hearing. Anybody would like to comment on it? Online?
Yes. Mike Barnbaum, you're free to speak.
Thank you. Good morning again. So on the public hearing for unmet transit needs, thank you for receiving the copies of the written comments. I went over in much more detail with Mike Costa last week on Monday. We held a 1-hour session in the office across the street from the board chamber. So I will just summarize here. So I proposed a new route called Route 9 along the Hazel and Sierra College Boulevard corridor between the Hazel Station and Sierra College campus in Rockland, notating connections 2 other Placer County routes, and a Roseville transit route at the college, along with the Gold Line light rail service at the Hazel Station, and how similar the proposal is to a route existing in the region today called the Route 138 Causeway Connection, and how that route, one single route, is operated by 2 different transit agencies to cover all the trips needed along that route. So that just shows an example of that type of partnership does exist today and perhaps could exist in the future if you determine that Route 9 is an unmet transit need reasonable to meet. The other route I highlighted was Route 10, an existing Placer County transit route from the light rail Blue Line at Watt and I-80 into downtown Auburn. What I wanted to highlight there was that with the ridership, generally speaking, 30-minute weekday peak period frequencies from 5 to 9 a.m. and 3 to 7 p.m., while existing hourly service in between those times, along with expanding service from 7 p.m. Hello? Can you hear me?
Geez. Wait, we're all
Yeah, we've
getting-
all got emergency
yeah.
alerts going
Just
on.
hang on
I'm getting
second.
that on my phone too.
Yeah,
It's an earthquake.
but doesn't say where.
Shake. Well, no, I think they're testing the earthquake alert system today.
Oh, okay.
That's all.
We're informed.
All right. Are they done testing?
Yes,
May I?
please continue.
Sorry.
Okay, I apologize. So as I was saying, 30-minute peak frequencies, 5 to 9 a.m. and 3 to 7 p.m., hourly service between 9 a.m. and 3 p.m., and added hourly service between 7 p.m. and 11 p.m. to accommodate the connections with the existing service hours of light rail. And then a more pressing need, as I addressed this earlier in comments not on the agenda, of more immediate importance for this route in particular is to immediately restore pre-pandemic weekday early morning and late evening span of service hours. This route is currently not reliable for folks needing to use for work and or school purposes.
Mr. Barnbaum?
Yeah,
Can you sum up your comments because your time has expired?
I'm concluding here.
Okay, good.
Based solely on operating on an emergency Saturday only schedule on all existing operating days. Lots of us felt that that was the most pressing unmet transit need that needs to immediately be addressed. And therefore we could attend meetings again in person and not have to be remote as we are today. If you have any questions of me, I'll be happy to answer anything, but otherwise that concludes my comments.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Barnbaum. Any other commenters?
Peter Eklund, you're free to speak.
Yes, thank you. Yes, my name is Peter Eklund. I'm a resident of Rockland, and I might add, I'm also a member of the advisory committee for the Unmet Needs Assessment Program. Mike did a good job of explaining the program. What I want to do right now is mention that its relationship to some of the other planning studies going on. There's a major short-range transit plan process going on, which is involving all of the operators. The unmet need transit assessment is a little bit of a misnomer because it has very strict criteria. In fact, if either dial-a-ride or fixed route serves an area, then it's considered an unmet transit need. And given the purpose of this assessment from a state level, that's perfectly fine. But it needs to be emphasized that this has really no relationship to the short-range transit planning process. There's a lot of unmet needs that will be addressed in that process, but they can't be addressed in this process because of the strict criteria, as I mentioned. And the purpose of the program actually is just to make sure that there aren't needs out there that can be immediately addressed, basically with reasonable funds. It's a very narrow window, and is from Mike's slides, you can see there are very little things that have passed through all the gates. It's like having six gates and having to fill in the combinations at each one of them. It's an important process, but it has no relationship with the short-range transit planning process. And PCTPA members need to understand that. There's one specific example where this has been used in the wrong way. There was a 2009 study on bus rapid transit, and as part of that study, the consultant said, there are no unmet needs assessments. This is in 2009. So therefore, bus rapid transit can use all of the LTF funds forever that are not being used right now to be used for bus rapid transit. This is a total misuse of this whole process. So I think it's just want to make you understand that because not very much is going to come out of this process, there still are unmet needs that need to be addressed in the short-range planning process. And I commend Mike for all of the work he does, because this is the major planning process that they get involved in an annual way, and he does a great job. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other commenters?
One more.
Okay.
We have two Michaels. With the other Michael, you're free to speak. Michael, you're free to speak.
Maybe he was affected by the.
Michael, are you able to unmute yourself and
Yeah,
make
it
your
went away.
comments?
He just put his hand down.
He put his hand down,
Okay.
so he's done.
Oh, now it's up.
Oh. Maybe he was affected by the earthquake.
He's still able to speak, so I don't.
We cannot hear you, Michael.
Yeah.
Yeah, perhaps you,
My hand,
There
my
we
hand
go.
is raised and I am unmuted.
we can hear you now.
Oh, thank you. Mike Garabedian, Placer County tomorrow. The first time I was exposed to one of these unmet needs surveys was, I happened upon it on the Sierra College campus, and I had a very good conversation for an hour, but it was ultimately useless. There's utterly no point to this. The historic transit failure here is by this very commission. The fact that there is no meaningful effort to look at a transit future to address the congestion on Highway 65 is nothing short of preposterous. That's not going on. So the fact that all the research demonstrates and proves that adding capacity to highways does not relieve congestion. So the projects later on your agenda and your work plan and that kind of thing, which has been the focus for so many years, planned so inadequately that time before we had the studies from UC Davis and Barbara Handy and so forth, that show that what you're planning to spend money on all these things that are not going to be useful to relieving congestion. You have people already in a transportation nightmare. You have people out surveying to see if people want to change. Well, I think the greatest example was how you sponsored a bill, AB 1413, I think it was, by the pro tem Atkins that I testified against in the Senate, the state Senate, opposed that bill that allows you to have the vote instead of countywide on transportation sales tax increase. So the fact that you are not having presentations like Barbara Handy, presentations on your hopeless and useless proposals to spend millions of dollars on the Placer County Parkway and and so forth, and the 65 interchange, where, you know, development is determining what is being done. And these sort of pretend solutions that that affect institutions of all kinds, like, you know, Sutter locating by the 65-80 interchange, a particularly absurd place to put it without good access to the highway, difficult traffic to get there. Why did it happen? Because a developer made a deal and sold that land and convinced Sutter that this was a great thing, as if it was like a downtown. Of course, it's not like Sutter downtown Sacramento, where there is highway access. So it's about time this commission started taking some look to the future. And if anything, though, what it took to get BART approved in the Bay Area, where it took organizing throughout the Bay Area and a vote in East County to get that finally approved, is not an effort that's happening here. And you're not doing it. San Francisco wasn't doing it until the public made that happen. And there is no public here making it happen. And finally, I'll just note, the large reason is your continued surveying forever, trying to convince people that your highway projects are going to solve the problem.
Mr.
It's
Garabedian?
really,
Mr. Garabedian,
Yes?
can you wrap up your comments? Your time has expired. Please.
well, I thank you for the opportunity, for the time I had. I really appreciate that. Once more to bring this before you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your comments.
That's a wrap.
Good. Anyone else?
That's it.
Okay, so, board, let's see, first of all, Mike, do you want to address some of the things that were comments or not so much questions? I don't know if you want to.
I think we've received all the comments. We'll take a look at them with our stakeholders, and we'll bring them back to this board as a part of our findings and study in
Okay,
early
okay.
next year.
I guess I probably should have closed the public hearing part of it.
Maybe you want to touch just for a moment, Mr. Garabedian has a habit of not recalling the conversation about bus rapid transit going up and down 65 and the plan for that. Maybe you want to touch on that a bit.
What Chair Joyner you're referring to is the Rapid Link or the South Placer Transit Express service. So yeah, there is, and this was, I wouldn't say it necessarily came out of an unmet transit need per se, but it did come out of planning for public transit services. And as part of a grant that we received to the state of California and other funding sources, hopefully beginning next year, we're anticipating by spring of 2024, a new 3-year pilot service will begin, which is an express-like service. It will have limited stops operating on weekdays only, Monday through Friday, a transit service from Lincoln. It'll serve 3 locations in Roseville, the Galleria and the 2 hospitals, Kaiser and Sutter, and then we'll continue down to the Watt I-80 light rail station. And again, that's going to operate on a limited stop frequency, Monday through Fridays, 30-minute frequencies, so 30 minutes, every 30 minutes the bus will pick you up. And essentially that should start in spring of 2024, pending some logistical things that are still being worked out.
Got it. Thank you, Mike.
Good, thank you. Anyone else? Okay, no other comments, then this is an action item.
You received the feedback, so we're good.
Yeah,
We don't need any additional action from the board.
Oh, okay, all right then. So we'll go on to item J.
Madam Chair, I was just gonna, just for the record, that was actually an earthquake. There was a 4.5 quake, 2.7 miles southwest from Ileton. So just want to let folks know that that was indeed an earthquake. So the kids in Rockland were sheltering in place for a short period of time. I don't have any reports of any damage, but this is the information from my husband, who is with Federal Department of Homeland Security. So I want to let you know.
All right.
That was a real alert.
Thank you for that. Okay, then we shall move on to item J. Fiscal year 2023-24, final findings of apportionment for the local transportation fund. Corey Peterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, members of the board. Corey Peterson, Senior Transportation Planner. I'm here to present as Chair Jones mentioned, the final findings of apportionment for the LTF. This is something that we do on an annual basis. We come before this board typically in February with preliminary findings of apportionment for the next upcoming fiscal year, and then the final findings typically come in August or September. We came in a little late this time around because there is actually a dip in our LTF revenues. We wanted to take some extra time to really make sure that we got the numbers right before we came before the board. But first I'll go over some of the historical LTF revenue. As you can see, since 2010, Placer County's sales tax revenue has been on a pretty steady incline, with an exception of a small dip at the start of the pandemic. This year is actually the first dip that we've had since prior to 2010, except for obviously the start of the pandemic. We received about $1.2 million less in sales tax revenue between fiscal year 21-22 and the last fiscal year of 22-23. As I mentioned, the last decrease was before 2010, except for that start of the pandemic when everything kind of shut down and there wasn't as much shopping going on, except for online. In response, the state of California is projecting a decrease in sales tax revenue for this next upcoming fiscal year 23-24. So in response, we adjusted our growth assumptions for the Placer County LTF and assumed a 0% growth between this past fiscal year and the upcoming one. So with that, I'll present the final apportionment. So we have a carryover balance from 22-23 of negative $672,000. There's a number of different reasons for that, which I'll get into later in the presentation. The final apportionment is around $30.8 million. 27.7 of this is available to your local agencies, and this is about 7.7% less than the preliminary apportionment that was presented to this board back in February. Here's a map that shows a quick snapshot of the revenues that each jurisdiction is getting. So Placer County is getting about 7 million, Roseville 10.6, and then Rockland is about 4.9, and Lincoln 3.6. And then in the last three cities, we have Loomis about 458,000, Auburn just under $1 million, and then Colfax about 140,000. And then as a reminder, we also set aside 2% of the LTF for bicycle and pedestrian projects. This year that comes out to just over 600,000. And then we also set aside 4.5% of the revenue for the Consolidated Transportation Services Agency, or CTSA. This year, actually, the CTSA, after some discussion, took a cut in their apportionment to help kind of offset a little bit of the shortfall that was being experienced from the LTF. So they adjusted that down to 2.4% just for this fiscal year only. So they're taking about 733,000. And then we also, some of the money also goes up to the Tahoe Basin and is apportioned to the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency. So getting to the decline in the apportionment amount. So after some discussion and research, the main reasons that we're seeing a decline in our apportionment this year is, as I mentioned, we have about 1.2 less in revenue between 21-22 and the next fiscal year. As a result, when we got our estimates from the county auditor, as we do each year, they forecasted the revenue to be about $1 million less than the preliminary forecast, which further declined our apportionment share. As I mentioned, we assumed a 0% growth to be more conservative in our assumptions. There was also about a $580,000 payment that was in a previous fiscal year erroneously reapportioned to the agencies, and we needed to correct that, which also declined the fund balance. But to kind of offset that, as I mentioned, the CTSA is taking about a half of its usual apportionment, and that's due to some carryover funds that the CTSA had that was not budgeted for anything, so we were able to make that adjustment. I've also revised the TDA guidelines. There was only some very minor text changes that were made to the document, and then we also have updated claim forms that have been provided to each of your staffs and will be posted to the PCTPA website should you choose to approve the final apportionments. And with that, I would like to request that the board approve the final 2023-24 LTF apportionments, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Board members, questions?
None.
Okay, well, we'll open this up to the public comment.
We do have one online.
Okay, good. Let's.
Michael Garabedian, you're free to speak.
Thank you. Michael Garabedian, taking this opportunity to address, it's not Barbara Handy, it's Susan Handy at UC Davis, who is in environmental science and policy there, and she is director of the National Center for Sustainable Transportation. If PCTPA isn't going to do its job to bring this kind of information and consideration to its policymaking in the public, then the public will have to figure out how to do it itself. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
No.
No? Okay. Board members?
Move staff recommendation.
Joiner seconds.
Okay, motion and a second.
Broadway,
Yes.
Burris,
Yes.
Cortez,
Aye.
Dowden Calvillo,
Aye.
Howdeshelt,
Aye.
Joyner,
Aye.
Jones.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Okay, moving on to item K, 2023-2024 Overall Work Program and Budget Amendment Number 2. Jody.
Good morning, Chair and Board. Today I'm presenting to you Amendment Number 2 of the OWP and Budget. You may be wondering what happened to Amendment 1. We had a request from Caltrans to update the wording on our activities around the RTP process this year, and I left those adjustments in there in this amendment for you to review. That Amendment 1 was just an administrative amendment, did not change any of the fiscal side of the budget, and it did not require board approval. So in looking at the Amendment 2 of this budget, our revenues decreased $151,000. That does include the reduction of the LTF that Corey just mentioned, and it also includes an addition of an SHA grant that we received to prepare a plan, a Placer County-wide active transportation plan. Direct cost decreased, and that was mainly due to the PG&E costs for the I-80 aux lanes. That was recognized in the previous fiscal year, so it was accrued last year and has been removed from the OWP for this year. And then some slight changes in salary and benefits with an increase of $16,000. And then this is a look at the budget between the final and Amendment 1, which had no changes, and Amendment 2. We ended up with a surplus of $199,000. Our reserves remain the same. And this is just a look at where our revenues are coming from. Pieces of the pie, pretty even. And 53% of those funds we receive are on a reimbursement basis. So we have to expend the funds and pay for the services prior to receiving the revenue. And this is a look at the expenditures. 91% are going to direct services for the work elements, and the remaining 9% is going to operating costs. And I didn't mention that we did have a decrease in the indirect cost due to the sale of the Nevada Station building and the reduction of rent that we will be paying. I did increase legal fees a bit for the bond sale. And this is a messy slide, but it shows where our revenues are directed towards. The very detailed slide, and how the blue is the final budget, the orange is Amendment 2. The majority of our expenses are going towards the State Route 49 sidewalk gap closure at 19.93%. Next is the funding strategy at 14.13%, and then finally our SACOG MPO planning RTP process at 13.75%.
The reason why I said it's a detailed slide is because I like that slide.
Well, good. I will keep providing this slide. And this last slide is where staff hours are being directed towards. And we've got 11% of staff time going towards both indirect cost and the SACOG MPO planning process, and 61% of staff, or 7% of staff time going to work element 61. And this concludes my presentation. Unless you have any other questions, staff recommends approval.
Okay. Board members, any comments, questions? No. Public comments, of course. Good.
Oh, no. Hand down. Okay.
No public comment?
Hand down, okay.
Oh, hand up.
Oh,
Right.
there is public comment?
There is.
Oh.
There is, yes. Michael Garabedian, you're free to speak.
Good morning, Michael Garabedian, Placer County Tomorrow and Pacific to America's Divide. Thank you for another opportunity to oppose the work plan. And I have a sneaking suspicion that it won't be the last time. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Anyone else? Okay. All right.
Madam Chair, I'll move approval of Amendment 2 as proposed.
Joyner seconds.
Okay, motion and a second.
Broadway,
Yes.
Burris,
Yes.
Cortez,
Aye.
Dowden Calvillo.
Aye.
Howdeshelt. Joyner.
Aye.
Jones.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Okay, moving on to item L. Nevada Station Building Sale and Bond Relinquishment. Mr. Click.
This is a, thank you, Madam Chair.
And Jody.
You want Jody to do? I know. Maybe I should say something here. This is going to be easy. Essentially, this is a pretty technical memorandum. We're essentially at this point asking you to approve this resolution, giving us the ability to sell the property. So this is a technical matter. Jody, I don't know if you want to add anything.
Sure. This resolution includes several things. It's the transfer from Sparta to PCTPA, which will occur during the escrow, and then paying off the lease revenue bond on the Nevada Station building. And there's a similar resolution at the Sparta packet as well.
Okay, then.
Just a quick question. Can you please remind me of the sale price? I think you told me last time, and I didn't see it in the documentation.
The sale price is $2.85 million, and on Monday, the buyer waived contingencies. So we are good to go. It's a gross of 2.85.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, so back to the board. Here, we have to adopt resolution number 20.
Is there any, if there's no public?
More public comment?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Then let's hear it.
Michael Barnbaum, you're free to speak.
Yes, good morning. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak on the sale and bond relinquishment of the Nevada Station building. Last Monday, as I mentioned in comment on an earlier item, it was an honor and pleasure to have a meeting with Mike Costa and the staff about the unmet transit needs. The building was very accessible to public transit. I took the 9 a.m. Route 10 to Nevada Station and walked right off the bus and into the building on time for the meeting, a sit-down meeting at 10:15 a.m. and was able to get right back on after the meeting at 11 a.m. and head back into Sacramento County. So my question about the sale and the bond relinquishment is, what preliminary locations, if you are looking at moving, has the PCTPA staff looked at to be the new headquarters office of the PCTPA and Sparta? Have any preliminary discussions about this occurred? And if a location or locations are more being focused on, are they both transit and non-transit accessible so that folks that need to attend to meetings of whatever length or need to access the building have choices between transit and non-transit modes if PCTPA is considering moving its headquarters here in the near future. Thank you.
If I could, through the chair. Thank you, Madam Chair. Michael, it's a great question, and so you know, PCTPA staff looked at 69 different locations all throughout our geography, went to a final list, and, you know, we had a lot of things to consider. You know, of course, cost, size, being prudent with public dollars, all of that. We are in the process of negotiating an office on Douglas Avenue in Roseville. And it is, I believe outside of Midtown, it's the largest concentration of office space in the 6-county region. So it is absolutely more than adequately served by public transit and other modes of transportation as well. I hope that answers your question.
You might add that you're not very far from Kaiser Permanente on Douglas Boulevard. So, because I know lots of people are going to Kaiser as well.
Yeah, we're right in the middle of it, right in the middle of everything, and hopefully we will have a signed lease by the end of the week.
Okay, all right. No other questions then?
Madam Chair, I'll move adoption of Resolution 2330.
No, you grab it, you second it.
The ladies have seconded.
We're arguing while you're getting business done, so thank
That's
you.
right.
Motion and second.
Okay. Broadway.
Yes.
Burris.
Yes.
Cortez.
Aye.
Dowden Calvillo.
Aye.
Howderschult. Joyner.
Aye.
Jones.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Okay. Item M, transportation funding, outreach, polling, and marketing update. Is someone going to present that?
Yeah, we're going to have Kurt Balow is going to come on up and give a presentation. Do we have the
Okay.
clickers up here? So quickly, just take an opportunity as Kurt's getting ready. What we have for you is an update on all of the recent polling relative to the measure. So I know he's been excited to talk to you all about this, a lot of interesting information, and then we'll give you a bit of a marketing update on the back end as well. So Kurt, with that, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you. Pleasure to be back here again, everybody. Nice to see everyone. Oh, there we go. I hear my voice now being picked up. So I'm going to go through, let's see here, first slide, there we go. My presentation, I noticed there were some comments about detailed slides. I guarantee you this will have some detailed slides. If there are too many details, you can interrupt me for clarification, but maybe we can hold sort of any conversation or ponderings about what the implications are till towards the end. So clarification question, feel free to interrupt, because I know some of these slides are a little bit dense. So a quick note about the survey we just conducted and some of the specifics and methodology. Very similar to what we've done the last couple times for the agency. We conducted the interviews end of September, beginning of October, what we call a dual mode voter survey. So the two modes are telephone interviews and online interviews. For people who took the interviews on the phone, we obviously called them. For those who took it online, they either received an email or a text invitation. And we got a relative balance of those two. Our firm tends to lean towards a close to an even split between the two modes, just to mitigate against potential mode biases. It's been interesting over time. When we first started doing online surveys, it was all young people taking them. Now it's actually the opposite. It's much more highly educated and older individuals who respond to email invitations. The key things here are the margins of sampling error. So for questions we asked of the full sample, just keep in mind about a 4% margin of sampling error. And for questions we split sampled, in which half got a different version, about 6%. So 4 and 6 are probably the key things to keep in mind here. So the first section here is where are voters' heads? And this was survey, I'll go back one slide quickly, just in Lincoln, Rockland, and Roseville. This was the area that has been sort of narrowed down over the years for a potential ballot measure. So the first section is where are voters' heads? How do they view traffic concerns? How do they view their own financial concerns, the economy? What do they think about the government agencies who would be endorsing or supporting or administering the funds generated by this measure? And I think there's some really interesting stuff here. So first is the old right direction, wrong track question. The blue bars are right direction. Those, I'm going to say brown for the sake of ease. It might be more of a mustard color, but we'll say brown, wrong track. So 48% of respondents in those 3 cities feel like this, the county's kind of headed in the right direction, a 30% wrong track. So it's plurality positive, but vibes were a little more optimistic if you go back 3 or 4 years. So we're kind of settling in right now to a spot here where more optimism than pessimism, but not as optimistic as voters were in the past, which I think I see a lot of nodding heads, which probably comports with what you'd expect. Here's where things get, I think, particularly interesting in the next 3 or 4 slides here. One of the things we saw historically is that voters' appetite for, swallowing that pill and for a sales tax really correlated with how much pain they're feeling with traffic. And during the pandemic, people weren't driving, concerns about traffic decreased, support for a measure went down a little bit too. So we're always really curious where those concerns are. And at the same time, there's many more economic concerns swirling around. We want to see how that stacks up there. So in this case, we presented a random sample of different issues that might be facing voters here. And they're not, many of these things you have no jurisdiction over as this particular agency, but you just want to see measuring points. The darker brown bars are the percentage of voters who said these are either an extremely or very serious problem. We have summarized those on the right-hand side. And you'll see that everything above that dashed red line is about 2/3 of voters think that's either an extremely or very serious problem, or at least 40% said extremely serious. So those are the ones that are packing the most punch. And it's a lot of cost of living issues, gas prices, inflation, cost of housing, cost of healthcare, a lot of cost of living issues and economic, things that hit people's pocketbooks. You also see a couple of things around homelessness, state and federal taxes, concerns about state government. What I want to point your attention to is a couple of things on the slide. Gas prices are way at the top. 61% said that was an extremely serious problem. We don't see that type of intensity for a lot. We asked this question, versions of this all over in our surveys. That's pretty high. So that is a real top of mind issue for voters in these 3 cities. So even amongst inflation, housing costs, and healthcare costs, that is particularly poignant. And then I'll look bottom here, you see second from the bottom or the bottom 2, traffic congestion either on freeways or local streets. Below that dashed line, so not quite as intense as those other items, but when we look at the historical context in a slide or 2, you'll see the trends. Second of these 2 slides here show items where we're talking maybe half or fewer voters said something was an extremely or very serious problem. And a few of these are just placeholders, the conflict in Ukraine, the fire risks, further down the list. What's interesting here to look at is, potholes. About half feel like that's a pressing problem, but it's not like traffic congestion here. The amount you pay in local taxes is also something that we look at. A little close attention here, 44%. So if you're starting to do the math for a 2/3 measure, if 44% of voters feel like local taxes are an extremely very serious problem, you can start to see where that runs into each other there. This is the interesting one. Hey, here's the details. All these tracks, we've been doing research for a long time. You can spend more time looking at these later, and I will just point out the one here that's the most interesting. Well, concern about potholes has gone up. Concern about state and federal reductions in transportation funding, that's gone up to all things that sort of make a measure potentially more viable. But it's just traffic congestion on freeways and highways. It was in the mid-60s pre-pandemic, dropped into the mid-50s. It's now for the first time sort of back to that mid-60s. And that seems to comport with all the actual real data about traffic congestion on these freeways and highways. So that is one of our indicators there. I will note we have a slide or 2 that gets to this a little more directly. 2 above that is jobs and unemployment. Just sort of a general, hey, I'm concerned to you about the local economy. It's still only in that 30% range, but it's been bouncing around a little bit the last couple of years. So this slide is things that had much more of a modest change over the last year or so. I'm going to skip over that and just notice that the amount people pay in local taxes, that's kind of been hovering in a high 30s, low 40s range pretty consistently over the years. So this is the next couple slides get at traffic and personal finances, a little more specificity. We have asked a version, pre-pandemic, we were asking this survey, a question, hey, do you think traffic has gotten better or worse, stayed the same over the recent time, last couple of years? We then had to change that question during the pandemic, a few different permutations, and so these are not all perfect tracks, because now we're trying to ask people, hey, think back pre-pandemic, because if you think back a year and a half ago, well, actually, it's a little bit different comparison. But you'll see 2/3 feel like, hey, this is worse than it was before the pandemic, and 43% said it's much worse. And that's starting to look a lot like the kind of gut concerns that people had 2019, early 2020. And they're even more pessimistic than they were back in June and early pandemic years. We asked, well, what about a couple years from now? Local traffic going to be better or worse? 81% of respondents said it will be worse, including 46%, creeping up on half, think it'll be much worse. And this is a data point. The other ones, if you look at the 2021 numbers, those were when the roads weren't as crowded. So it was a lower bar to say, yeah, I think it'll be worse. This is now, it's gotten back to what most people think is worse than the pandemic, and yet they still think it will be worse in a couple of years. Another question we asked along those lines was, how do you feel about the impact on your quality of life traffic has? And we just started this question at the end of 2021. People said, yeah, it's bad, but it wasn't like a visceral thing. And now we have just about 4 out of 5 voters feel like traffic congestion has at least somewhat of a negative impact on their quality of life. And 3 out of 10, 29%, feel like that has a very negative impact. So we've got, traffic's gotten worse, I think it's going to get worse, and it's having a more negative impact on my quality of life. On the economics, and I promised we had another question about this, we said over the next year, which gets us to roughly a potential election of next November, do you expect your household's personal financial situation to get worse, better, stay the same? 35% said it would be worse, 17% said better. Not a lot of intensity, not a lot of people saying much worse or much better, and a big chunk in that middle ground. But the thing that I'm looking at here is just the trend. If you look at that far right column, the brown numbers, 14 in the mid-20s, now mid-30s, that is sort of creeping up a little bit. So a little more economic anxiety, although it's not a top-of-mind issue when we compare to everything else, but it's just percolating there. And what happens with that over the next year is sort of I'll say this more often than I probably should. There's a push and pull. The traffic concerns, economic concerns, and how those play themselves out really impacts the viability for a measure. I'm going to pause for a little water break. All right, so this section I'll go through somewhat quickly. We just asked a little bit about favorabilities of your agency and the 3 cities, just to kind of, in the county, different agencies that will have a role in implementing spending, supporting a measure, lets us know where voters are. The blue bars are shades of favorability, the brown bars are shades of unfavorability, and the gray are either I've never heard of that agency or I've heard of them and I can't rate them. So this is the County Board of Supervisors, kind of hovering in the same spot, a little less than 50% have a favorable opinion. It's more than 2-to-1 ratio of favorable to unfavorable opinions. Not a big change in actually for a long time now. Your agency, similar kind of 2-to-1 favorable to unfavorable ratio, but bigger gray bars, in particular bigger dark gray bars, which are those I've never heard of. 17%, it's not a huge number, but not a particularly well-known agency, but those who hold an opinion are more likely to hold a positive one.
I'm sorry, can you go back to that one? So 40% have no NHO is...
Never heard of. And that's 17%. Yeah.
Or who they could prefer. Right, and then you have 23%
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I see where you're going, yep. Oh, sorry, I was looking at the favorable, said 40, yeah. Yeah, so 2 and 5, I can't rate one way or another, either I haven't heard of or I have. And some of that's a little bit of like, there's something called social desirability bias. Maybe you haven't really heard of the agency, but you don't want to admit that. So you say, yeah, I've heard of them. I don't know much about them, I can't say. That may mean I haven't actually heard. So Lincoln Town City Government opinions, they've had the most oscillations, extremely high in 2017. Dipped down, kind of climbed back up. I mean, a little bit of a dip now, but they've been in the most variation over the years. These are, I'm going to go through a little more quickly here. Rockland, kind of holding steady in there. For those of you who are competitive, 71% favorable number. And Roseville, an only 70%. So looking at that. But pretty similar perceptions over the course of the last several years. All right, so let's get to the measure itself. So the context there, the government agencies are generally viewed somewhat similar. Traffic, bigger concern. Economic concerns, creeping up too. What we did here is tested a hypothetical 75-word ballot language. It's going to look somewhat similar to what we've tested in the past with a couple of tweaks. This one is more specifically focused just on traffic congestion relief. In prior versions, we've included things around emergency responders, because if you get people off the roads, they can respond more quickly, but we took that out of 75 words. We talked about safe routes to schools. You'll see that that's still a priority, but we took that out. We were really much more focused on traffic congestion, here's the projects, and with the exception of road repairs, kind of we're otherwise very focused. And we split sampled this with one version that kind of led with the benefits. So if you read that top one, it's the traffic relief plan, and the first clause is, shall I measure to reduce traffic congestion? That's what we went with. Both of these are the half-cent versions. The second one is we added local control plan, and the first clause is, shall I measure that generates local funding that cannot be taken by the state? So they're otherwise very similar, but we're just sort of testing which resonated more strongly. And you'll see here that what we do in both online or on the phone, we read you or you read, depending on your mode, the 75 words. Would you vote yes or no? Yeses and nos we pushed, definitely or probable. Undecideds we pushed, leaning one way or another. So we get 3 flavors of yeses and nos. You'll see that in aggregate, the 2 versions were virtually identical, 68 and 69%. A point or two above the 2/3 vote threshold. There's more intensity around the benefits side, which was the more people said they would definitely vote yes. So if you're squinting to look at a difference, that may be suggestive that one is a little bit more viable, but we're in that range. The bottom set of bars combines those 2 versions just because they're so similar, and then for some of these questions, it's beneficial for us to look at the full sample. So that's what that is. So overall, 68% yes. In the historical context, when we look at just those initial raw gut votes, the 68%, you could say, well, it's not much different than last year when we looked at a slightly different version, which was at 67. But you can see that there's a bit of a trend here where support was much higher pre-pandemic, much higher when there was much more traffic on the roads, and it dipped. And now you're starting to see, all right, and the points are starting to add up, where support is starting to creep back up to around that 2/3 level. And now we have 2 data points in a row last year and this year where we're right around the 2/3 level, where it had dipped down into basically around 60% before. There's lots of different types of crosstabs we can go through here. This is combining both versions here. Just a couple key things here that we thought were interesting. Democrats tend to be more supportive of revenue measures, so that's not surprising that they're up at 75%. Independents actually look pretty much like Democrats, which is interesting. That's not always the case, and a lot of independents here can be a little more fiscally conservative. And Republicans, while not at 2/3, you had 62% of those who indicated that they would vote yes. Looking at this by age, really no difference. Men and women, maybe women marginally more supportive, but not much of a difference there. White and the biggest ethnic group, Latinos, kind of in the same ballpark as well. So a lot of consistency here is probably the big takeaway. Lincoln, Rockland, and Roseville all get to a 2 1/3 level. Lincoln, we've seen more in the last several surveys, more consistently has a little bit more support. You can maybe make arguments that they feel the most pain from some of the traffic conditions and what this might address. And looking by the different districts that, does not include District 5, and the different portions of the other ones, kind of the same too. So a lot of consistency. If you are a highway and freeway commuter, you get behind the wheel of a car, a vehicle, and drive on those freeways, your support level is higher than those who don't commute, or maybe they're a commuter but they're not driving. Maybe they're taking transit, or maybe they're doing something else. So, as not surprisingly, those who are getting behind the wheel of the car and stuck in the traffic are more supportive. This is the thing that's kind of interesting with those attitudinal questions and why they're so important. So the first set of bars is, do you think traffic is worse or stayed about the same? Very few people said got better. Since before the pandemic, if you think it's worse, you're in the 70s. Even if you think it stayed the same, you're still in the 60s. If you think the traffic's going to be worse 2 years from now, and you think it's going to be much worse 2 years from now, you're in the 70s of support. If you think it's going to be about the same, you think maybe we've plateaued in the area, 55%. So those perceptions really do correlate with support here. And if you feel like had a very negative impact, that 29% who said the traffic has a very negative impact on their quality of life, their support is almost at 80%. So those are all, as those perceptions change, support is likely to go up, and we've seen that over the course. The bottom set, though, is the other side of the coin. If you feel like your financial outlook is going to be better, which is not a ton of people, your support is pretty high, about the same. If you are concerned that in a year your personal household finances will be worse, your support is lower. That was only 35% of these voters that we looked at here, but as I noted, that's been growing a little bit. So this is a thing to keep an eye on.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
can I just make sure I understand that? So that is support for the benefits argument, is that what you're saying?
Combining both versions.
Both versions, okay.
Yeah.
But those bars represent, okay.
Yep. So let's say 68%, if you combine both versions, indicate they vote yes of the full 631.
Thanks.
And it goes down to 61 if you're like, hey, I'm concerned about my personal finances.
Thank you very much. Make sure I understood that.
We did ask a couple open-ended questions. If you said, hey, I'm going to vote yes on this measure, whatever flavor of yes it was, tell us in your own words why you'd vote yes. So this is just asked of those who are inclined to vote yes. And then they either typed in or told the interviewer on the phone, and we do our best to categorize them. And these numbers may add up to more than 100% because oftentimes people have more than one rationale. But it's just really about traffic, 65 and the interchange. Really the big things here. And some people did pick out the road repairs, and some people did say, hey, we're growing at a rate we need to deal with this. But there weren't a lot of, economic rationales. A few people said, hey, half cent's not that much, but those weren't really the driving rationales for supporters. On the no side, surprise of surprises, taxes are a big concern. So half of those who said they'd vote no are saying they're opposed to taxes or feel like the tax rates are too high as they are. There's a little bit of, that 28% of no voters. Those folks are saying, hey, I feel like the money's being mismanaged. Those were the primary rationales there. All right. We typically go through a process where we give everyone those 75 words. Would you vote yes? Would you vote no? And that's the only thing we're guaranteed somebody will at least theoretically read before they vote. We can't simulate an entire election context, but we can give some pro and con arguments. In this survey, we just did a comprehensive, all the rationales for voting yes and all the rationales for voting no, and we wanted to see if it would move people around. I will not pause on this. You can read this at your leisure. It's very tight, very a lot dense, but this is traffic's back to pre-pandemic levels. There's a lot of gridlock. We want to fix the interchange. We want to widen 65. It's going to have some local road repairs. It's going to be locally controlled. We've got this really great opportunity to access state and federal funds that we will otherwise miss out on. I may be missing one or two, but that's basically, here are the reasons why you'd want to vote yes. On the opposition side, there's this constant barrage of tax increases. Cost of living's gone up, inflation's gone up. We can't trust our folks to spend this money the way and the gas tax is supposed to fix this. The basics, those are the big rationales there. And so this is, again, just to clarify, for the full, combining both versions for now. I'll break them out in a second. If everyone said 68% yes, after pros and cons, we dropped to 55. This is after modeling a scenario where 100% of voters are listening to or reading or getting information from both sides. We all know a lot of voters won't do that, or they might just look at who's endorsing something. But this is trying to model what that will look like. We've seen this dynamic over and over again for this particular measure, is that support does go down if there's a lot of criticism. This is just the benefits version, the one that leads with the benefits, and it has that same dynamic, goes from 68 to 54. I just want to point out that the definitely yes kind of holds on though, drops a few points. This is the one where we flipped it and did the local control. Aggregate numbers basically the same. The intensity kind of drops a little bit there too. So in aggregate, those two versions look very similar, but the intensity is still a little bit higher for leading with, it's dealing with traffic congestion. We did rotate the order. So half of the respondents got arguments in favor and then negatives, and the other half started with negatives and then got positives. Just to see, sometimes that has an impact. So this is the half that got the positive arguments first. Yeah, pushed it up only a couple points. We ended back at 54%. For the half that got the negatives, it dropped quickly to 55, and those positives didn't really push it back up. So this, I think, just goes to the impact of the criticisms, or kind of didn't matter what order people heard those in, they were impactful. The last substantive section here, is we went through a variety of ways that the funds could be invested, spent, and some manners in which they can be invested and spent. And we asked, how important is it to you as a voter here, a resident here? Either extremely, very, somewhat, or not too important. The darker blue bars are either extremely or very important, and we summarized those on the right-hand side and sorted by it here. And some of these we split sampled because there were similar concepts, and we were looking to see what was resonated more strongly. And I'll talk about those comparisons momentarily. But you'll see here that, with the exception of that road repair one, it's a lot of just traffic congestion, and a lot of items here to the second, the third, the fifth were about some sort of local control, protecting our funds, and getting matching funds. So, hey, let's get those funds, make sure that let's just control them, and let's make sure it's going to traffic congestion. Road repair is actually up there pretty high, but the intensity is interesting. It's only at 34, extremely important compared to everything else, which is 10 plus points higher. Moving down the list, these are all still items where 2/3 said extremely or very important. So these do resonate, and we've been paring down the list of things we've asked about over the years because we know what doesn't resonate as well. Here you start to see the schools kick in there, some of the specifics around widening 65. And then further down the list, we have a dashed red line where things drop meaningfully below 60% here. There's a couple items I'll point out here. The making transportation investments or building transportation projects. In those 75 words, you need to have some sort of language that is broad enough to reflect the different types of projects that might be included. There wasn't a big difference there. We also asked about bus service. So do we want to expand bus service to get cars off the road? Kind of talking about the benefits of it, at least from a congestion point of view, or just expanding bus service as part of an overall plan. And there wasn't much of a difference between those two either. These two slides take some of those similar concepts that were paired up just to sort of put them head to head. It's interesting here on this slide, talking about fixing the interchange bottleneck versus widening the interchange. let's fix the bottleneck there. That's the language that resonates more strongly. Funding local road repair versus repairing them. Apparently voters reacted more strongly to, hey, we're actually funding those repairs. Talking about routes to schools and sidewalks, there's a distinction there as well. And then when it comes to sort of transportation funds, making eligible versus qualifying seems to be a distinction as well. These other ones that we did some split sampling with, not a lot of big differences here. So if we're talking about traffic congestion on freeways and highways versus 80 and 65, everyone gets it. Some places you kind of have to be specific and call out the roads or the freeways. Doesn't make a difference, everyone gets it here. So that gets us to the conclusions. I'm sorry, this is a long presentation, but we got a lot of good tracking data in here too. Broadly speaking, I'll just say cost of living issues, gas taxes, big concerns for voters here. And we're starting to see just this percolating concern about personal finances. It's not a top level concern at all, but it's just sort of bubbling and trending in a direction that suggests there's more economic anxiety amongst many voters. And that creates kind of, I'll use this headwind metaphor. This tailwind is traffic's getting really bad. Everyone's acknowledging that. And there's a growing consensus that it's just going to get worse unless something is done. And so that's creating this tailwind on the other side that's starting to look a lot like pre-pandemic levels. So what does that have to do with viability here? We have strong majority support for a measure. We've seen that all the way from 2016 when a measure was on the ballot and did get into the 60s in support. And it does fall down into the 50s. That's something we've seen as well. The starting point's a little bit higher than it's been in the past. And it suggests that, and with those other tailwinds, which are about the traffic congestion and things of that nature, that this measure is as viable as it's been in the last several years. And the dynamic from things that are somewhat out of our control here are, where do the traffic concerns go? Do they continue to get worse? Do people continue to feel that pain? And where do the economic anxieties, what happens there? And how that develops over the course between now and if you were to put something on the ballot is going to be really determinative. There is also this curveball, which is ACA 1 on the ballot this November, which I will let smarter minds speak to. But that is something that could potentially have a very meaningful impact on a measure, but it's very much obviously uncertain at this point in time. You told me to do this in like 10 minutes.
That was good.
Did I meet the mark?
Perfect. I love the passion. So, take a breath and a drink of water. And we'll through the chair. Go ahead. Sorry.
Board members, comments, questions?
The three of us have seen this data already.
Okay.
No real surprise, I guess. I mean,
I don't know that our traffic solution will ever really be, the more people move here.
Right. Gets worse.
We're gonna continue to have it. We can continue to try to expand and stuff like that, but the more people, the more traffic.
Mm-hmm. It's been
But
generally
it's-
how
It's good that you guys are at least planning ahead. It's.
The other side of that, though, is as we bring more jobs locally, as we create job centers, those commutes into Sacramento diminish if we
Yeah.
keep traffic.
Yeah.
and our expanded rail opportunity.
Yeah, I was just thinking that.
Your
railroads-
expanded
Yeah.
That's right, not yours, sorry.
Well, it's been the way the greater Sacramento area, we've always been trying to play catch up with our transportation planning.
Madam Chair?
Yes?
So when you did the survey, how did you weight? Rosevelle's 155,000, you're 52, you're 74. How did you weight that so that, if you get 50% of 155,000,
Yep.
that's more than 3 times. I know those aren't, but how did you weight that to ensure that you reflect?
Yeah, in exactly those ratios. So when we pull our sample from the voter file, we know where people live, and we have those as the ratios, geographically speaking. And what we do, without wading into the details too much, is that we have the sample stratified. So our target here was 600 interviews. We overshot that a little because it just happens. And we essentially create 600 lists of voters who share common characteristics. So a certain number of those lists would be all Roseville voters, and then some portions of those would be Roseville men, Roseville women. And what we do is we go through each of those little clusters and we work our way through, complete an interview, and put that cluster aside and move to the next. So if we conduct one interview in each cluster, it will look demographically.
So I think,
Yep.
yeah, so what you've said to me is it's not skewed and weighted toward, you know, toward the unincorporated area.
No,
It's balanced in there, and that's important, right?
Yep.
And 50%, like I said, 50%, you know, in one jurisdiction is more than 50% in another jurisdiction.
Yep. Yep.
Thank you.
More questions or comments? Anyone from the?
I could through the chair.
Yeah, there we
Before
have
we,
some.
so that was the quantitative half of it. Hopefully that was 9/10 of it, not half of it. But now we're going to have Cherry come up and give you a little bit of a qualitative update, show you a marketing update, a couple videos really quick.
Yeah, thank you.
So in a broadcast booth, that was play-by-play.
Color commentary, exactly.
Yes, color
Exactly.
commentary. Okay, chair, directors, thank you so much for having me here today. Right, I always talk about this journey, and here we are at the next stage of our journey. I think I was here last in June giving you all an update. So from the numbers perspective, then the most important thing I want to say to you all is thank you. Because thank you so much for answering my emails every time I ask you, hey, can we be at this event? Or hey, can you do this? Or hey, can we be here at Sun City? Or can we do this in Rockland? Because really, I think that that's had an effect. Obviously, the congestion is a big piece of that. But what I have always stood before you and said during the public outreach program that we're in, because right, there's no measure on the ballot, is everybody has to be on the same message, saying the same thing, and believe that this is the most important issue facing Placer. So thank you for that. So a couple things I just wanted to say on the numbers. The matching funds argument, we've seen that now. It's there. That to me has always been the most important thing, getting people to understand the matching funds guarantees us money. We're paying other people's transportation sales tax measures, essentially funds, when we go to these other communities. So I'm so happy about that. Okay, that 2 years ago, people thought it was going to be much worse. 77%. We're there right now, 2 years from now, which we're thinking in 2024 perhaps, it's going to be even worse. And I hate saying that because I hate thinking about our neighbors and friends having a poor quality of life, but at the same time, for what we're trying to do here is really good. And I just feel gross saying that, but it's the truth. Okay, so the other thing, Matt, I know you're like 40%. Nobody knows our agency when we saw these, when we saw this. But if you go back and look at that slide, it went from 31% to 40% from April 2022. But if you look at that historically, when you look at those numbers, it's when we've done a full force public outreach program. When we've pulled back, that's when we've seen those numbers fall. So that still continues to be really important because we know that people here will pass a funding measure if they know who's in charge of the money, they know what the money is going to be for, and they know what their recourse is if it's not being spent appropriately. So that continues to be important. So just wanted to tell you, I'm excited about the 40%. The other thing that has been different this time, well, I shouldn't say different this time. The strategic decision was made after April 2022. We went dark until about last year, around this time, was because of the time frame that we had to operate in, we are going full steam ahead. So we have digital running all of the time. We have direct mail, which I'll talk a little bit about, where before we would ramp up and ramp down, and now it's consistent. It's very much a consistent presence. So from my perspective, I felt really happy about those numbers, especially because personally we've worked on this so long, and I'm so invested in this with all of you, that's for sure. Okay, so what have we done since June? We have been at State of the Cities, we have been at coffees, we have been at the Lincoln Airport event, we've been at the Lincoln Showcase, we've been at Hot Chili Cool Car. I mean, we have been everywhere. And it takes a little bit of everything to move this whole operation forward. So again, thank you for all of that. So Okay, let's not play them yet, but I'm going to tell you one more thing. So like I mentioned, and I apologize for getting on my phone, but the data just came in while I was sitting here. Okay, so we started running 15-second spots, which you all saw in June when we were here. Andy Galloway was here with me. You might recall meeting him, and he kind of went through how that digital program was going to work. He wanted to be here today, but he's in Australia visiting his family, and I really couldn't figure it out because I'm like, don't you have to join the meeting tomorrow for a meeting today? So we just decided that I would do it, and he could do whatever he's doing in Australia. But nevertheless, so the campaign to date with what we have running on those streaming platform spots, so like Roku and Hulu and all that, plus our Meta, we're at 2.2 million impressions and 14.1 click-throughs to the website, which is really, really amazing considering that we just started in June. What I'm going to show you today is our new, well, hold on before I do that. We also have the direct mail. So if you went through and you click through to the website, then a mail piece, a direct mail piece was sent to your house, and depending on what age demographic you fell in, it could be a piece about emergency response, or it could be what, various different messaging like Kurt had went through. 12,000 direct mail pieces have been sent since essentially June as well. So that's been really helpful to us in enforcing this message. Okay, so now we can show the spots. Okay, so
commutes to work and school.
These are the new
appointments during rush hour.
30-second spots that we have ready.
Engagements. There's always somewhere to be. We're often stuck crawling from one stop to the next. The quality of our lives shouldn't be punctuated by the potholes and traffic. State and federal funding alone won't fix it. This is a local problem, requiring a local solution before it gets much worse. Together, we can protect our quality of life in Placer County. Learn more about our plan for Placer County at keepplacermoving.com.
Race suspension and supercharged for high performance. You've totally earned this. Extra horses, leather seats, premium tires, the entire package. Torqued, tuned, and ready to roll. Into clogged intersections and idling in gridlock. Your car's performance just can't deliver, stuck on roadways in Placer County, jammed with cars. Learn about our performance plan for the roads, the highways, and future mobility of Placer County at keepplacermoving.com.
It's starting to sound like a Rockland problem with everything.
No, I know. So that is so funny that you said that, because when I got those, from Andy, he sent them all over to me first. And I'm like, what? Like, you can't just have Rockland. And then I realized, okay, they're never going to be shown back to back like this, but I will have to say something when I am in front of you all here that it's all the cities. So then we're going into the next round of creative. So we'll have some Lincoln and we'll have some Roseville, but nobody ever actually sees them like that, back to back. So we have those two running right now on the streaming platforms, like I said, Hulu, Roku, all that stuff, Peacock. So what are we doing, from here on out? So I'd like to come back to you all in January and just give you a kind of year-end 2023, here's what we've done, and here's where we're going for the first part of 2024. You all have worked with me and Aldo long enough to know that we're constantly refining our program too. So when I look at 81% for gas prices, and I know this is something that we all spoke about before, what can we do with that 81% of gas prices? Wow, sitting in congestion and traffic, you're wasting a lot of money by doing that, and how do we tie that? So we'll refine that and look to see where the appropriate way is to use that messaging. And then, let's see, we will be continuing with our events and our coffees and all of those wonderful things, but that is where we are right now. So I'll take any questions from all of you on the program if you have any.
Board members? Questions, comments?
No, just thank you for the Rockland inclusion.
It's not, I mean, it appears that I get it, you guys.
Ken said you had to go outside of Rockland to find a people like that.
I get it. Okay, all right, well, thank you so much for everything, I appreciate it.
Thank you, Sherry. Thank you. We open up to public comment, okay.
Yeah, we do have a person.
Michael Garabedian, you're free to speak.
Well, thank you for giving me the floor once more. For those interested, I have suggested reading. It's a brand new book from MIT Press. It's called Shifting Gears Toward a New Way of Thinking About Transportation, and it's by the person I mentioned before, Susan Handy. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else in the audience?
We do have some. Peter Eklund, you're free to speak.
My name is Peter Eklund again. I'm a Rockland resident. Yeah, I've been following this process for quite a while. The presentation was limited really just to the funding. It doesn't go into the the real crux of the matter, which is what's the text and dollar signs for the sales tax measure, and it can't really provide any really detailed comments without knowing that information. And I think it really should be provided as same time. Otherwise, as I say, it's hard to analyze the results. I am pleased. It's interesting to note that congestion is looked at a higher level than pre-pandemic. I think it needs to be understood that particularly 65 is used a lot for local transportation. It's not just for commuting. I think an overall comment is that I think it's very dangerous to use polling to establish priorities. There's a real difference between coming up, you really need to come up with needs and then establish a dollar figure. Now the dollar figure might be very low, but the needs are high, and that won't show up in polling. Clearly transit, let me say, I'm strongly in favor of the sales tax measure for both roads and transit, as long as it's done in a realistic way. It should be done county-wide. It should not be done just for the three major cities, because both roads and transit work on a county level, and there's going to be major disruptions in funding if it's done on a limited basis. I think that's an important thing to consider. Rockland, for example, has 3 routes that go between Auburn and East Rockland. I think Rockland would be within its rights to basically cancel those 3 routes if they're already subsidizing the 3 routes at a high level, including the commuter service. And so I think this needs to be considered, and I think you can get county-wide support. Just because of changes in population, you really gained 2% already since 2016. You've gone from 63% to 65%, if you look at the numbers. And also, a big deal is the fact that that there will be on the next ballot a constitutional amendment to reduce the threshold for infrastructure, including roads and transit, from 67% to 55%. And all of the data shows through the polling that would pass. The big difference is you can't fund operating expenses, but that's not important at all. The only 2 programs that would involve operating expenses are road transit and bus rapid transit. There's plenty of money available through LTF, which is state money. It's not local funding, it's state money that comes to the cities. There's plenty of money available, at least for the next 15 years, to fund. You don't need extra funding. The funding figures that have been in the past sales tax measures are wildly extravagant. You have to remember, gone through a period of declining transit, pandemic, and basically the funding has been the same. So basically the percentages of LTF have gone down. So there's plenty of money available. Get rid of the operating expenses and definitely get rid of bus rapid transit entirely. There's nothing to justify that at all, either for infrastructure or operating.
Mr. Eklund, can you sum up your comments?
I'll make one final comment. I'm looking forward to seeing the sales tax measure, but I don't, please, the polling is a political exercise. It doesn't really relate to what's going to, what can really pass and can be supported with with detailed planning.
Okay,
Thanks.
thank you so much for your comments. Would anyone like to address his comments?
I can start. I was actually going to make a comment, Madam Chair. And I don't have the time necessarily to address all of Peter's comments, but what I really want to do, just say broadly, is I want to thank Peter. Peter has a lot of passion around this. He's got a lot of intelligence, and he comes to this with a spirit of wanting to collaborate with us and sort of make our processes better. So really all I want to do is thank Peter for his participation.
Okay, anyone else have any other comments? Okay, and no one else online?
No.
That one is just an informational item. Okay.
Oh, hold on,
Yes.
wait, hold on. Oh, sorry. Oh, that was just informational. I thought you were going to information.
No, I'm not going to overlook
I was
it.
gonna get
I'm moving on to item N.
You what, right? I know. Let's go.
Executive Director's Report. We would never forget you.
Yeah, I am getting the bum. I'm on the back end of 2 hours here, and I feel it. We all feel it. I get it. Some of this we covered. Just quickly, though, 299 Nevada Street, sale update, and Director Cavilla asked about it. $2.85 million gross sale. Will close on the 4th of December, 3 days after our prepayment penalty expires, so that'll save us about $80,000, which is great. And the buyer waived contingencies on Monday, and as we talked about last time we were together, it's another public entity that'll bring about 20 jobs to the Auburn area at 299 Nevada. As far as our new office space, we are in final negotiations for space on Douglas. Really have to take a moment to talk about, some of the things we're proud about. And right now we spend about $14,500 a month on rent. Our new rent will be $8,300 a month. Our first 4 months of rent will be free. So over the next 8 years, which would have been the balance of what we would have had to rent out at 299, we'll save almost $600,000 to the agency. We'll also go from 6,000 square feet to about 3,200 square feet. So, we do take a lot of pride in being as efficient as we can with the taxpayer dollar. And I think our move in selling this asset and getting into lease space is reflective of that. Moving on to Senate Bill 125. So just to give you an update, this was funding primarily to assist transit providers, Senate Bill 125 was. And this was a way for them to address the operational and capital needs of the transit systems all across the state. You've all heard in the public this idea of the quote-unquote fiscal cliff. So not only are the big urban counties getting some of these funds, but we are as well. We are slated to get $37.85 million in TIRSIP and ZETSIP funding. Mike has already been working with all of your member jurisdictions on a list of priorities. Some initial ideas is to invest in electrical charging infrastructure, zero-emission buses, and potentially working with CCJPA to provide them some additional funds for the phase 2 of the third track. So we're working with them right now. So we're developing the project list. You'll hear more about that in December and January. Of course, we're all going to be in DC next week, or some of us will be for the PBA trip. And our federal lobbyist out of the Ferguson Group will be giving a presentation on sort of the state of funding at the federal level on Thursday. There's 2 other new bits of news they're so fresh, they're not on the slide. One is just having to share a little bit of difficult news with you regarding the Highway 49 gap closure project. We haven't spoken about this in a couple of years. We've been working hard on it. We just opened or got our estimates for utility relocation from PG&E, and you know where I'm going. So PG&E's estimates for electrical and gas were $1.7 million over engineers' estimate. It's the same story, right? Inflation, estimates were done now, things have changed. So we are, what are we doing? We're trying to go find that money. We just don't have 1.7 under the couch cushions. Rick's been working hard with CTC staff. Remember, $14 million of this money is a grant through them to see could we move some of this money from certain phasing to earlier phasing. We're not going to be able to avail ourselves of that procedurally because of the type of money it is. He's also working with Caltrans to essentially look at if there's other ways we can sort of amend the project to absorb that $1.7 million and other forms. But to be honest, what this is likely going to mean is we're going to, at a minimum, have to de-scope the project, meaning we're going to have to take some of the capital project elements out because scope and budget must stay in alignment. And we just currently, we don't have at our ready other dollars. We're going to have other conversations with other folks, so we haven't given up yet, but we just want to make you aware of that. In fact, Rick is going to go down to Riverside on December 6th and 7th to the CTC meeting and represent us there, so he'll be absent at our December meeting. So,
Matt, so is this,
please.
we're talking directly about the sidewalk project out here in city limits?
Yeah.
You were talking about, correct, that's the
Yep.
piece of it that's 1.7 million over, just for that,
For the relocation of the utility.
just in that stretch?
Yeah, I think the whole project's like over 3 miles.
Okay, so the whole project, okay.
Yeah,
gotcha.
yeah,
Oh.
sorry. Yeah. But, Rick, Corey, the team, they've come up with a creative way to make sure there's a continuity of improvement. So they're looking at taking out elements that, well, I won't say they're redundant, they're, we're going to try to retain as much benefit as we can as we de-scope the project. And I should say, if we have to de-scope the project. We certainly didn't want to just, come to you in January and not sort of give you a teaser on this, since we haven't spoken about this project in some time. So that's a little bit of what's going on with that. We will keep you abreast of what we learn as we learn it. And then a super fresh piece of news. You've heard me talk about the fact that, PCTPA has a MOU with SACOG, and SACOG is the federal MPO. It has to do all of our air quality modeling and other associated sort of programmatic things as its role as the federal MPO. PCTPA has had a memorandum of understanding with SACOG that goes back to 1973. And it's just expanded in time as the Federal Clean Air Act has expanded and the non-attainment part of Placer County has now become all of Placer County, right? So that has just grown over time. Back in 1976, we agreed to give them 2% of our LTF contributions, and that those contributions could increase. They would be capped at a maximum of 10% per year. Really what that's led to is us giving SACOG a fair amount of money on an annual basis, and then that money growing larger at a quicker rate than our per capita population because of the robust nature of our sales tax base. To the fact that next year we were slated to give them, I think, $522,000. This, didn't seem really fair, right? So we engaged in a series of conversations with SACOG over the last 6 to 7 months to talk about this. There are other things inside of that memorandum of understanding, them recognizing us as the RTPA, us recognizing them as the federal MPO. But foundationally, a lot of this is about how much we pay them, and then also what are we getting for those services, and then at what rate would that escalate. And I want to take an opportunity to really thank James. He's been a great partner in this, and we have a handshake deal as of last night to take that down to $330,000. So starting next year, we will cut our obligation by $200,000. I think what's probably even more important is we are going to have a new rate at which we escalate that money over time. So it will no longer be attached to LTF, but it will be attached to CPI or some other sort of increasing method. So that's really the big savings for us, is we'll see an immediate $200,000 savings, around $200,000 next year. But in 10 years from now, that would have grown to probably in excess of $1 million. Whereas now, if you are to rate out that 330 by 2.5% per year, you're talking about $450,000, $500,000. So we will work through the details over the coming months. It will probably come before this board in January to take action on. But I did want to just, end on a little bit of good news as well. And I do want to publicly thank SACOG, not just James, but Eric Johnson, his number 2 on the finance side as well. That ends my report, Madam Chair.
Okay, great. Anyone have any questions? My only inquiry would be on your developing your project lists, and you talk about zero-emission buses. Do you work with the Air Pollution Control District on that? Because they, every now and then, they have grant money that they put out for,
We do. Mike's our liaison. Mike, do you want to come on and talk about what you've been doing with the Air Control District?
Yeah, so we actually partner with the Air Pollution Control District, the local Placer County Air Pollution Control District, on many things, and they have a lot of grants available for offsetting some of those costs. We work with our operators to pursue those funds through the Air District, and actually some of our operators have been successful at acquiring some of those through the Air District to, again, offset those zero-emission infrastructure and bus replacement costs.
okay, great, because I serve on that board as well. Anyway, yeah. Okay, anything else? There's informational items listed on your agenda, and if there's nothing else, our next meeting, I should say, our last meeting of the year is December 6th, Wednesday, December 6th, 2023. Is there anything else that needs to come before the board? Hearing none, this meeting is adjourned.